Club. All right, I'm not actually hearing from the GMAT Club yet. I'm going to go ahead and proceed. Hopefully this screen is sharing. Welcome today. My name is Dr. Shelle Watts. I'm with MBAadmit.com. I'm always happy to join the GMAT Club for another webinar. Today's topic is the executive assessment. It's a very popular topic because this is a new test and everyone's curious about whether it's a good thing or a bad thing and how to best prepare for it. So the topic is what score is good enough and other frequently asked questions. Before I get into this topic, I want to just tell you a little bit about our company. MBA has been around for decades. I have been providing MBA admissions advising for over 33 years. We have very deep experience with the EMBA programs because our company predates most of them by about 10 years. Here's a snapshot of some of the schools that we've worked with extensively, have great records of success with them. And if you're curious about what we think in terms of whether you will be a strong candidate to a top EMBA program, feel free to send to us your most recent resume at info@mbaadmit.com, or you can also go to our website and fill out the profile evaluation form there. Here is an EMBA ebook, which is free for you if you want to go ahead and get to our website and download that. We are coming out with the second edition in about 7 days. So for anyone who gets this version, we will send to you the updated second edition in about 7 days. And then to mark this webinar, we are offering 30% off for candidates between the next 7 days, so the 13th to the 20th. Feel free to just reach out to us and mention this special offer, and we're happy to extend that to you. All right, so let's get into the topic. What is the executive assessment? The executive assessment, or EA, was launched in 2016, and the reason it came about is because as these EMBA programs began to spring up, what we found, what the industry found, and what the schools found is that the candidates just did not have enough time as busy executives who have a high level of responsibility, as well as families usually. They just didn't have time to study for the GMAT, and so they would carve out what little time they could study and then end up with quite poor scores. Somewhere in between 580 to 660 was rather typical. And those scores did not reflect their abilities or predict their odds of success in the programs. So after getting some feedback and discussing with the schools, the Graduate Management Admission Council, GMAC, which is the organization that makes the GMAT, responded to feedback, and they prepared, designed this executive assessment, and again, it launched out in 2016. So what is the executive assessment supposed to be all about? GMAC said they wanted it to be relevant, short, and provide an accurate snapshot of workplace skills and the quant skills that you're going to need to do well in an EMBA program. So it's a 90-minute test, which is much shorter than the GMAT. It's offered year-round. It's offered at test centers in approximately 600 locations, and you're able to test within 24 hours of booking an appointment in theory. The structure of the executive assessment is this. So 3 sections of 30 minutes each. Integrated reasoning, which has 12 questions, and the sections are multi-source reasoning, graphics interpretation, 2-part analysis, and table analysis. There's a verbal section, which has 14 questions. That covers reading comprehension, critical reasoning, and sentence correction. And there's also a quantitative part, 14 questions, and that covers data sufficiency as well as problem solving. Which programs accept the executive assessment? Well, at this point, a whole lot of them. So, 2 years back, it was just a handful. Now, all the top schools from Wharton to London Business School to Yale, Columbia, INSEAD. So you have quite a number of schools that accept it now. And that's good news for you, because as someone thinking about an executive MBA program, it just means that you're going to be able to prepare more easily with less time for the standardized test score that many of these schools are asking for. The question that many people were nervous about, and still are to some extent, is whether the schools prefer the GMAT, and therefore, if they take the executive assessment instead, will they be at a disadvantage? What we've found is that the schools do not prefer the GMAT over the executive assessment, and so there is really very small incentive to go forward and take the GMAT because the executive assessment is so much easier to prepare for. So at this point, the vast majority of our candidates that we see, and we do work with quite a number of EMBA candidates, the vast majority are taking the executive assessment. The one exception is Wharton so far. That's the one major exception where they prefer that younger candidates take the GMAT test. And so basically, if you have 8 years of full-time experience or less, they prefer to see a GMAT score from you, and actually they require that. So for most other schools, though, there's no preference, and if you have a strong executive assessment score, that will put you in a good position. What has been the impact of the executive assessment on admissions? Increased access, but that also means increased competition. So for you, it's been great news to find that there's a test that's a lot easier to prepare for. And also my candidates tend to find that it's a lot easier to score well on it. But the bad news is that now a lot more people can apply because it's that much easier to be able to put an application together and have the standardized test score. So the numbers of applications have gone up. That has made these programs more competitive. For example, between 2015 and 2017, Columbia Business School reported that for its New York programs, the number of applications went up 27% for the Friday and Saturday program and 44% for the Saturdays only. So that's a very big jump. And that just means that you need to make sure to pay attention to how you're putting together your application, the recommendations, the resume, the application form itself, and make sure you're submitting a strong application because things seem to just be getting more competitive given the arrival of the executive assessment on the scene. So what score is ideal? 150, 152, 158. It really is going to depend on the school, also can depend on your profile. But let's just talk about how the scoring works. So there's 3 sections, 30 minutes each. Each of those sections gets a raw score between 0 and 20. And then those 3 are combined in a weighted way to bring a overall score of between 100 and 200. So when you hear someone saying, I got a 14 on my quant, that's one of those 3 sections, and that is the raw score. And when you hear someone say, I got a 155 on the EA, what they're talking about is the overall weighted score for all 3 sections. The one thing to remember with the executive assessment, which is very different than the GMAT, is that you only get 2 tries, and that is a huge thing. That means that, and it means lifetime. It doesn't mean per year. So at total, you get 2 shots at it, and you cannot cancel your score. So you really want to make sure that before you take it, you're ready to take it, because if you don't get the score you first want, you only have 1 additional try after that. And then in many cases, if the score is just too low and you still want a school that has a standardized test requirement, you may have to take the GMAT, which is simply something that you ideally would avoid having to take. So what score is good enough? This has been changing over time. It's also been changing by school. When it first came out in the first couple of years, most of the schools were saying that 150 overall was a fine score. That has been changing. And so now I would say a score between 147 and 150 with a quant of 9 to 10 can be viable at many top 10 programs. That's assuming that you have a strong application, recommendations, essays, resumes, so forth. 152 with a quant of 10 to 12 is more safe for the top programs. 155 with a quant of 12 to 14 is better for Wharton. And then 155 or above with a quant of 14 is more ideal for overrepresented profiles who are applying to Wharton. So that might be foreign nationals from East Asia or foreign national Indian men in the technology sector. So if you're overrepresented, you want to get as high as you can. And so 157 or higher, ideally with a quant of 14 or higher, is a better score to have. In terms of breaking it down, here are some of the other schools and what they've been telling candidates they're looking for. So Columbia, New York, for the EMBA program, has been saying this past year that 148 to 152 is fine. Booth has said 150. Haas has said 148 to 152. So this is in the 2019 to 2020 admissions season, because this has changed over time. And so this is what it has been this year. For those of you who are looking at this, who may not have scored as well as these yet, the good thing to know is that the application really does have an impact. And so we have helped people with as low as 138 and 141 get into some of the top programs, including schools like Columbia. So it is possible, but obviously you want to aim for as high a score as you possibly can land in this test. Many candidates ask the question, does IR matter? What we find is that right now, by itself, a poor IR score in the executive assessment will not derail an application. But if you did both poorly in both quant and the IR sections, that's more problematic, because that raises the question about whether you're ready to handle the quant of the program. And so the IR matters if the quant is lower. I wanted to give you all a sense of what a sample quant question looks like. So this is taken from the GMAT website. You can get on the website and take a look at a lot of other sample questions. They have many up there. And so this is just one, but you'll see that it's not extremely difficult. So let's just read this through. It says increasing the original price of an article by 15% and then increasing the new price by 15% is equivalent to increasing the original price by. And then if you were to do the math, you should get the answer A. So that is a quant question example. In terms of the verbal section, here's an example of a sentence correction question. Again, this is coming from the GMAT website. And so you'll see that in this sentence, what needs to be corrected is just that gray area where it's a bit wordy. And the answer that you should get is C. So again, it's not horribly complex. So the question, a big question for many candidates, is how should I prepare? A good place to begin is to purchase the questions that the GMAT institution provides for you. So if you go on their website, they offer for $150 official practice assessments bundle. And that is going to include hundreds of practice questions in each of the three sections. So, the IR, the quant, and the verbal. It will also include 4 full-length practice assessments. And so 2 of those are past real exams, and 2 of them are mock exams. But for all of those, you're able to take each one all the way through in a timed fashion and project your score. So it's very useful for you to see, how you're scoring. What are other ways that people prepare? This really depends on your level of quant proficiency already. Some people are doing very quant heavy work, and so they're up to date on those skills, and other people had educational training and they are comfortable with quant. Other people are coming with less quant experience academically or professionally, and so they may need more preparation. So based on your own background, you'll understand or have a sense of what you need. But here are some ways that people do prepare. So some people go get the GMAT materials and they use that to prepare, especially with the quant. Some people go and they take online math or a quant course, and that will help them prepare them for the quant section. Some people go to the same type of test preparation organizations that help prepare people for the GMAT. Some people go to a private tutor, and then again, some people just do self-study. So really just depends on you and how you feel in terms of your quant readiness. And again, the quant is really what most people worry about much more than the verbal. And so how much time does it take to prepare? It's the same thing, that it really depends on your proficiency already with regard to quant and integrative reasoning. So preparing, how do you go about preparing, figuring out, are you close to being ready? Do you need a lot more study, and so forth? This is one way that many candidates find very useful. First of all, get a hold of those GMAT questions from the GMAT website, and then start to work through some of those practice questions. At some point, after you've kind of gotten a little exposure to what the questions are like, you should take a practice exam and project your score. Now, once you know what the score is on that first of 4 exams, you'll know how far you are from potentially being ready. So if you have a 146 on that practice, but you really want a 155 in reality, then you have some studying to do. And if you score 152 on those practice exams, of the first one, and then you want 155, you're pretty close. And so you may not need as much preparation. So just use that to calibrate how much additional prep time you need. And then from there, if you need to study more, then do so, and then take a second practice exam. But be sure to really space out those practice exams, because there are only 4, and ideally you just take each one time so that it's a relatively accurate presentation of what your score might be. In terms of how accurate is it, that's the next question. How accurate are these, the mock exams or the prior exams, as you're using them as a practice source? What we have found is that the majority of our candidates, when they do those, what we call mock exams, they score about 3 points higher than what they will score in reality. So basically, if you do score a 156, you might get a 153 on the real test. And so you can use that anecdotal, sort of 3 points higher rule to sort of see how close you can get to the score you really want. But ideally, again, if you're aiming for 155, then you might want the mock to come in around 158. If you're aiming for 150, you might want the mock to come in around 153. Is it possible to submit the executive assessment after the deadline? The reason people want to know this is that sometimes they really want to apply for an EMBA program. They might be deciding relatively late and close to the deadline, and they feel that they need more time to study. And so they're worried about, do I have to wait a whole year to, prepare an application because my executive assessment, I'm not ready yet? And the answer is that many of the top schools will actually allow you to turn in the score 2 to 3 weeks after the deadline. And so you can submit the essays, the form, ideally the recommendations also on time, and then submit the executive assessment score a few weeks later. But the key thing is reach out to the school, call them, make sure that they're okay with that, and that the application will still be considered an on-time submission. But what we have found is that the majority of them permit that. So what happens if you only get in the 140s on your first try? The first question to ask is it high or low 140s? If it's high and it's one of those schools that has said that 150 is fine or 152 is fine, you may be close enough. And so you may want to reach out to the school and see what they would like you to do. The big question also is, how was your quant score? And so you want to make sure it was strong. So 9, 10, 11, 12 for many of the schools is fine. Again, Wharton tends to want 12 to 14, but the quant metric within that is important. So if it was a low 140s, that's in most cases when you do want to retest. Again, you can reach out to the school and ask them what they'd like you to do. But in most cases, the low 140s would mean that you want to try to take it a second time. So then the next big question is, of course, do candidates do better on a second try? What we have found is that candidates who do study a bit more, so it may only be 2 weeks or 3 weeks, they tend to have about a 3-point increase in score. And that can make a big difference. So if a score said, they want 152 and you were at 149, you might get that 3-point increase in a few weeks, and then you're going to be much more less at risk in terms of the score, in terms of the application. People who rush into it and say, hey, I just had a bad day, let me just retest, what we found is that the score is not going to go up, but because it might have been something more than just you had bad timing or you had a bad day. So ideally, if you are going to retest, give yourself a few weeks, if not longer, study, take a couple of the practice exams if you haven't taken them all already, project the score, and then test when you're really feeling that you're ready. Just remember, you only get 2 tries. So here's the question. There are some people who do their best, and then after the second test, they still have a low score. So they ask, what do I do now? And so again, that's going to be based on profile, the school you're applying to, all sorts of things. But in general, there are instances where schools will ignore a low executive assessment score. Typically, you'll have strong professional experience, and ideally, you have something else to point to show that you have strong quant skills. The question is, does an admission committee ever ignore both a low EA and a low GPA? Again, depends on the school and so forth, but usually there are those cases where they will. And again, the professional experience has to be really strong. And then ideally, you might have a good reason why the GPA had been lower. And then on top of that, if there's more distance from the GPA, then that makes it less relevant. And then also if you have other metrics to show that you're quant ready for the program, so you're ready to handle the quant, then there is a chance that they will ignore both a low EA and a low GPA. The next question, is there ever a scenario where I have to take the GMAT if I have too low executive assessment scores? The answer is yes. There are some schools that, especially those that keep a high bar on the academics, where they'll say to you, go take the GMAT. Now, that's just not the thing you want to hear, because the GMAT takes so much time to study for, and we have found that most executives just can't get a good score because they don't have the time to study for it. And so you do want to be not in that situation, but there have been cases where someone was told to take the GMAT again, and or rather take the GMAT a first time. And even when that score didn't come in, well, because the school knows that they're tooling up and they really wanted the candidate, they were willing to bring them in even with the low GMAT and too low executive assessments scores. So at this stage of the game with the executive MBA, professional experience means so much. And so if you're able to showcase that extremely well in the application, you sometimes can get through and around these other things. So the last question on this sheet to go over is, should I start looking at EMBA programs that don't require a standardized test score if I have too low EA scores? And that can be a strategy to do, because if you don't have to present the EA, then it sort of takes the issue off the table. If you have a low GPA and you're thinking that you need to offer something, it can be something besides a standardized test score. So for both candidates who have a strong undergraduate GPA and those that do not, sometimes looking at a program that does not require a standardized test may be a better option than presenting a low EA score. All right, well, that's the end. I'm going to be taking questions. Feel free, though, to reach out to us after this webinar. And, if you'd like a profile evaluation, send your resume or fill out the form on our website. You can email me directly otherwise. And I'm happy to take questions at this point in the Q&A. Okay, sorry about that. So I see the first question. What is the highest executive assessment score I've seen? I think the highest so far is 163 that I've actually seen. Someone had claimed to have a 170, but I didn't actually see the actual report. So in terms of what I've actually seen, it's been 163. And that candidate, actually from schools like Wharton, he was hearing that was quite an off the charts performance. So that would be great if anyone ends up in the 161 to 163 range. Another question? Okay, this question, if you have a low GPA, should you take the executive assessment for a school that does not require a test like MIT? I sort of just went over that, but essentially, you will, if you have a low GPA, it just really depends on the school. Okay, so some schools keep a higher academic bar, like MIT, and other schools are much more flexible. And so if you're applying to one that's more flexible and there's quite a lot of distance since the college experience, so say it's been 13 years, most schools will say something 13 years old is not defining of you anymore. And so you could proceed, if you have really strong professional experience, to go for one that doesn't have an EA requirement. But if it's an MIT where they keep the academic bar high, so even though they don't require the EA, if you have a low GPA, they will want to see something to show that you have the quant skills to excel in their program. So in that case, the executive assessment could be something you take if you think you can take it and do well and show them. But there's also other things that you can do, like an online course. So it doesn't have to be the only route, but for a school that does have a high academic bar, you need to offset the low GPA somehow. All right, I'll be looking for another question. Well, okay, what is the split number of questions? I think that varies if I'm correct. So you'll have to go. A good way to know that for sure is really just go take those 4 tests that they have on the website. But I don't think they actually will let you know beforehand what the split will be. So I wouldn't want to even use my past clients to answer that question, because it may be changing with each of the new tests that they're putting out there. All right. Okay, so here's a question about GMAT waiver. So for schools that let you have a GMAT waiver, should you go for that waiver or just take the EA in order to present a score? What we have found is that they're not going to grant the waiver if they don't think you have great skills. So you're not putting yourself at risk to ask for it, because if you get it, then you've saved yourself all the trouble of taking the standardized test. And so the vast majority of candidates that we have worked with to try to get GMAT waivers have gotten them. They're people that had quant degrees, or they've had a quant job as well. And so the school was satisfied that they had the skills to be able to do well in the program. So I would say if you think you're qualified to get the GMAT waiver, you might as well try and save yourself the trouble of testing for the EA. All right, so here's a question about the GRE. So how do the GRE and EA compare in terms of difficulty? And would you ever advise someone to take the GRE instead of the executive assessment? Well, the executive assessment, from everything I've heard from all my clients, is much easier than the GMAT or the GRE. And so it really should be the first test you try in many cases, because you may score well and you're done. Now, if someone has not done well on the executive assessment twice and they're thinking about taking a standardized test, between the GRE and the GMAT, the GRE is said to be easier on quant. And so if quant is your weak spot, maybe you want to go that direction. So to answer the question, the executive assessment, most people believe, is easier than the GRE and the GMAT. And in general, no, I would not suggest taking the GRE instead of the executive assessment. The executive assessment was designed for the EMBA pool. And so with more time, all the schools are seeing, what it means in terms of where the score is and how students perform. And I think it's a great option for people to take if they're applying for an EMBA. Okay, this one, what is the highest quant score I've ever seen? 18 is the highest. And so presumably the raw score goes up to 20. And so the highest I've seen is 18. Let's see if there's another question coming. I'll take a few more. Let's see if another one comes through. I see some on some of that you're posting here. Okay, what would be an acceptable executive assessment score for an applicant coming from an overrepresented applicant pool, like an Indian foreign national male who is in the tech field? Well, it's really easy to overgeneralize, but it really depends on the school, and it depends on how high up someone is in their organization. But in general, for all schools but Wharton, the EA score can be between 150 and 150 to 152 on the low side. One in the high 140s is risky, but we just had a candidate who is Indian for a national male in the technology field. He just got into Haas, and he was in the 140s. And so, the strong application can make up for a lot of deficit in the EA. But generally speaking, you should be aiming for, I would say 152 is a great number. 150 is pushing it in terms on the low side. And then much more safe is 155 and higher. And so again, for Wharton, 157, 158 is something that they're very pleased with, but they will still keep an open mind for candidates who are around 155 as well. There's always exceptions. So, as much as maybe 155 is a kind of lower end for that overrepresented pool, a super strong applicant in terms of professional experience could still probably get by with 150, 152. All right. So do I think that there's more leeway given on the executive assessment to women? Let's see. Yes, because women they apply in fewer numbers, and therefore, because of that and the fact that the schools would love to have a very diverse class, then if the only major concern is the executive assessment, that the schools know that they can help the candidate tool up in other ways, like directing them to take an online course or something like that. So in general, yes, I think women do have a bit more leeway to apply, and the school will work with them to make sure that they just tool up before starting. And again, assuming it's a very attractive professional profile and that the application was put together very well. All right. I think this may be my last question. Have you ever known Wharton to let someone with less than 8 years of work experience take the EA instead of the GMAT? Well, the executive assessment has only been accepted at Wharton for, I believe, 3 years at this point. So before that, everybody took the GMAT. And today, the requirement is if you're on the younger side, so less than 8 years of work experience, you're supposed to present a GMAT score. And I do think that it matters greatly. So if you try to get by with an executive assessment, I think that that could be problematic. So I wouldn't take the risk. I would go ahead and take the GMAT. You should remember that at Wharton, you can get by with a low GMAT. Even when you're younger, if the whole application and candidacy is very attractive. And so we've seen people as low as 580 get into Wharton. We've also seen, 610, 620, 640. So if you do have to take the GMAT and you don't score well, you should really just work hard to put together a great application, get some feedback, make sure that, you're seeing everything soundly. But again, we've seen many, many candidates get in with a low GMAT score if everything else was put together well. And again, if they also offered some evidence that they have quant skills that will allow them to succeed in the program. Well, we're getting to the end now. I think that will be my last question. I do want to, though, mention that you should try to hit subscribe on the GMAT Club YouTube channel if you'd like to be informed of MBA videos that are coming out. And there's a special offer as a part of this session. If you subscribe, you will get a 7-day subscription to the GMAT Club. Activation is instant. So look for a link in the comments where you can do that. And so thank you again for joining us today. It was wonderful. Good luck with your applications. Feel free to reach out to us if you need any assistance, if you'd like a profile evaluation. And thanks for being here. It was wonderful as always.